No, here's the real problem. The real problem is them coon-ass niggas like this one right here.
In the personal story segment tonight, the far left now using the shooting death of Walter Scott by a cop in South Carolina as evidence that police killings of black men are a systemic problem in America. There was this on Today on MSNBC.
It clearly shows how comfortable cops feel doing this because they know they can get away with it. There's a sense of knowledge that it will be assumed that somehow something went wrong and there'll be an acquittal.
You say cops. Really, we have to say really bad cops.
But
a small number of cops.
Suspects.
But as the Factor has reported, police killings of African Americans are down 70% over the last 50 years. So why perpetrate these claims? Joining me now, Fox News analyst Alan Combs, and from Washington, D.C., Horace Cooper, co-chairman of Project 21, a black conservative group. Alan, I'm going to start with you. If black shootings are down 70%, why claim this is about race? Why in the world? But first of all, should Mika Brzezinski do her math, do her homework, and realize that
she did? And
I don't know if she did.
And by the way, it's not just the far left. You love to say, and this show always says the far left as opposed to just the left.
I would call her far left.
It's actually statistics. I'm sure you would. See, you were talking about statistics over the last 50 years. ProPublica, citing FBI statistics, does statistics over just the last 4 or 5 years where this has become a systemic problem, and they show that blacks are 21 more times more likely to be shot by white cops than whites are.
The far left. I'm sorry. The very far left think tank.
You want to denounce something?
No, but you're denouncing me for saying the far left and using
That's not the far left.
The source where the buses don't run left.
The source of the information is FBI statistics.
All right, Horace Cooper,
FBI, is that the far left, Eric?
No, but I think your numbers are wrong. Horace, go ahead. Let's talk about this for a second. Blacks are incarcerated at a rate of 6 to 7 times that of whites in America. And blacks are being killed, unarmed blacks are being killed about the same rate as whites in America. That would lend the idea, or if Alan wants to use some math, that would say that whites are actually being shot at a higher incident rate than blacks.
I agree, Eric, and this is a problem. In the black community, we need to have a conversation that's unencumbered by the radical left and progressives' agenda that tries to use government coercion to address some problems. Here's the reality. Black Americans like myself, we have an elevated risk of death that will come not from law enforcement, but that will come from other black Americans. I want to make this one quick point. If you look at the mortality rate in America between white men and black men, according to the CDC, the second most likely contributor to that disparity is homicide. There is no other ethnic group that homicide ranks as high, and the statistics actually show it's black people killing other black people.
You're talking about homicide, blacks versus blacks, which I understand, and your statistics are correct. We're talking about the relationship between law enforcement officials and African Americans, which is a different set of stats than black-on-black crime in general.
So hold on, Horace, for 1 second. So just give me 1 second. So, Alan, if blacks and whites are being killed, unarmed blacks and whites are being killed at about the same rate, is that right?
No,
about 40%, about 40 to 45%.
Not when you take into account, as the FBI stats show,
but just bear with me.
Population disparity.
That's what I'm trying to get to. I get that. So there are about 13% black population in America and substantially higher, multiples of white population, correct?
Correct.
But blacks are being incarcerated at a much higher rate as
they were incarcerated. Absolutely correct. That's a different issue than cops killing blacks.
So there are more incidences of black incarceration. Wouldn't that lend itself to more opportunity for a black to be shot by a cop?
Well, you're conflating two very different situations.
You're correct,
You're
Eric.
conflating
that's basic math.
which is a separate problem because they're not treated well in the justice system,
Horace,
which is why they're incarcerated.
Am I conflating anything, Horace, or am I just talking numbers? By the way, I do this for a living.
No, that's basic math. But here's the real problem, and the reason why I mentioned this homicide rate among blacks. Homicide's a crime. If no other ethnic group faces this risk, it is a sign that there's a disparate amount of criminality happening in this one group. Not with whites, not with Asians. And if there's a higher level of criminality, there will be a higher level of encounter with law enforcement. The truth is, as Eric has been explaining, if you consider the elevated number of times that black Americans encounter law enforcement versus the actual number of deaths, it turns out that black people are not actually at risk. They're actually in a favored category.
No, that's not absurd. It's actually the math.
That's absurd.
Let me ask you this.
That's purely a leap. That's a running broad jump.
That's not a leap. That's the DOJ.
No, you're making an assumption based on stats that don't match up. You're talking about two different sets of information. One having to do with how many times cops kill black men versus how many blacks are committing crime in general.
But there's a direct correlation.
You're making the assumption there's some kind of correlation.
Well, there is. You have to be a fool not to make that correlation. If there's more instances of crime, that there's more chance of being shot.
You're connecting A and B and coming up with
F. Before we run out of time in the segment, Alan, what makes you think anything that happened to Walter Scott had to do with race?
I don't know specifically whether that did or did not. What we're talking about here is there a systemic issue, and if you see time after time after time,
how can it be systemic?
Whether it's Tamir, or whether it's what happened in Cleveland at Walmart, or whether it's happened in Ferguson, time after time, and plus a number of times it's probably not even reported. Plus, we know that the cop, we see on the video, he planted something by his body. How often does that happen?
Did the cop plant something by his body because he was black?
I just answered
you're alluding to the fact that maybe he may have done it because he was black. Go ahead, Horace. Final thought.
This is the progressive impulse. Every single police killing is documented. We understand all of the details of every police killing. But what we don't need is to have the argument made that there is a systemic problem when the evidence shows that there are other problems that progressives don't care about. They say Black Lives Matter. They say Black Lives Matter. But when in Chicago there are more black deaths that happened in 2014 than in the last 10 years of all police white on black shootings, they say nothing about it.
And you know what? It's a heated topic,
they
guys.
don't care.
It's a heated topic, and we're going to have a lot more of that coming up after the break. And say thank you to Alan and Horace. Directly ahead, is it ever justifiable for a cop to shoot a suspect who is fleeing? We're going to tell you what the law says next.